Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Amy, the left just can't seem to rid itself of its violent tendencies, can it? We had the assassination of those two Israeli embassy employees and a couple last week.
Sarah.
We find out that the alleged killer's father is a good friend of Illinois Congressman Chuy Garcia.
Mm-hmm.
Chuy had him at the Trump's address to the joint session of Congress.
Mm-hmm. That was his and 1+1.
Over the weekend, Seattle police arrested 23 Antifa goons who attacked a Christian worship event at a park. Boy, it's reminding me of the old heady days of autonomous zones in places like Seattle and Portland.
Chaz, was it called the Chaz zone? Or
Yeah.
something? Yeah, that's where it was.
We had a U.S. citizen, dual citizen, U.S.-German citizen, arrested for planning the firebombing of the U.S. Embassy branch office in Tel Aviv and also apparently making threats in the direction of President Trump. Boy, this is all after the apparent, Free Palestine-inspired murder of these two young Israeli embassy workers. You had University of Penn climate crank Michael Mann posting on Blue Sky. You want to talk about sort of a platform that incubates hatred and ignorance. Michael Mann reacting to a story about a federal judge enjoining the Trump actions in the direction of the Department of Education, saying of this federal judge's order, if Trump doesn't comply, we're in Second Amendment territory. Okay.
Oh,
University of Penn climate crank is going to lead the armed revolution against the common sense counter revolution that is being perpetrated through policy by President Trump over the Department of Education's funding or the distribution of said funding. Second Amendment territory. I really don't think you want to play that game if, Professor Mann, among others. Elon Musk said something the other week at that Qatari Economic Forum that was sponsored by Bloomberg when it came to the violence that he has been subjected to, he and his business and his customers, if you're a Tesla owner, have been subjected to. And that there is a response coming, he believes, and he would be in a position to know.
It is. I did what needed to be done. The violent antibody reaction, and I'm not someone who's ever committed violence, and yet massive violence was committed against my companies. Massive violence was threatened against me. Who are these people? Why would they do that? How wrong can they be? They're on the wrong side of history, and that's an evil thing to do. To go and damage some poor innocent person's car, to threaten to kill me. What's wrong with these people? I've not harmed anyone. So something needs to be done about them, and a number of them are going to prison, and they deserve it. And more will.
You're referring to the attacks on Tesla showrooms, but I think
firing bullets into showrooms and burning down cars is unacceptable.
Yeah.
Those people will go to prison, and the people that funded them and organized them will also go to prison. Don't worry.
But wouldn't you?
We're coming for you.
Wouldn't you?
We're coming for you, and he sort of pointed at the screen. If you know who you are, sort of thing. John Hinderaker is president of the Center of the American Experiment, contributor to Powerline, powerlineblog.com. John, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, great to be with you, Dan.
Well, it just seems appropriate since the left was having a candlelight vigils in places like Minneapolis to memorialize the 5-year anniversary of George Floyd's death that we talk a little bit about the left's penchant for violence in pursuit of their politics because, it spiked then, as we all know, and, it really continues unabated, taking different forms.
Well, it does, Dan, and you just had Elon Musk talking about violence directed against Tesla. Hennepin County, which is the biggest county in Minnesota, includes Minneapolis and many suburbs, has a county attorney named Mary Moriarty, and she has basically declared open season on Teslas in Hennepin County. There was a guy, a state employee, in fact, who keyed and did massive damage to 6 Teslas over a 2-week period, did $21,000 worth of damage, and she refused to charge him criminally with anything. Simultaneously, she did charge a woman who keyed one car and did $6,000 worth of damage, but it wasn't the Tesla. So
you have to key the right car.
Oh, wow.
She's basically saying to anybody who lives in Hennepin County, it is open season on Teslas. We've never seen this kind of lawlessness before.
What is Minneapolis like 5 years later? Because we've seen pictures online, some before and after pictures, certain areas of Minneapolis that don't seem like they've fared better post George Floyd than pre George Floyd. But you're there, so you have an on the ground perspective.
So I was interviewed a week or two ago by somebody from public television in the area here, wanting to get my thoughts on Minneapolis 5 years after the George Floyd riots, and I told him what I thought, and he said they'd be sending a film crew around to my office to interview me on film for their story, but that never happened. Apparently my thoughts on what's happened in Minneapolis over the last 5 years didn't make the editorial cut. So the short answer to your question, Dan, is Minneapolis better? Yeah, it's better. It's better, but it hasn't remotely rebounded to what it was before the George Floyd riots. The 3rd Precinct Station House, which was ordered abandoned by the police, by the authorities, and then burned, destroyed by the rioters, has never been rebuilt. It's still this, it's surrounded by a chain wire fence. It stands there as a monument to criminal violence. And that part of the city, which is called Uptown, and Uptown's a little west of there, but right off Lake Street, has never come back. The stores are closed, the restaurants are closed. There's very little activity. Downtown Minneapolis, there's a nice new building in downtown Minneapolis, really in the heart of the city, that sold for $200 million in, I think it was 2017. And just recently, it sold for $6 million. 97% decline in value of commercial real estate because there's nobody there. Nobody wants to commute to downtown Minneapolis to go to work. So, riots like the ones that we experienced have really long-term consequences.
Well, how did people celebrate the 5th year anniversary of George Floyd in Minneapolis?
Good question. I can tell you this, I didn't celebrate it. I don't know. They still have this thing called George Floyd Square. You could drive by there and there's a memorial to this, lifelong criminal. And people that own businesses in the area have pleaded with the authorities to dismantle George Floyd Square and restore traffic patterns, and, they're all going broke. And so, it's a very tough situation.
Has there been any sort of general movement in terms of reflecting on all that transpired? And I'm talking about sort of the larger electorate's understanding of that and rethinking the approach to things like policing and law enforcement, with your Hennepin County State's Attorney and with Jacob Frey, I'm guessing not. But I just wonder, it's like, because we see the same psychosis in Chicago, right? People are basically dead from the neck up, we're just meandering about, bumping into each other. But any reconsideration about sort of like what is my understanding of what happened and what do I think is a sensible way forward to improve Minneapolis-St. Paul? Any of that happening?
Well, not much. You know, the Minneapolis City Council is probably as far left as Seattle's or Portland's. I mean, it's terrible. Our chief of police, who's new, just recently was quoted publicly talking about these liberal attitudes in Minneapolis and how hard it makes it if you're working in law enforcement. You know, the George Floyd riots were as devastating as they were in large part because Governor Tim Walz refused to call out the National Guard for days. And his wife, you know, famously talked about leaving the windows open so she could smell the burning tires when the riots were going on. She thought it was the smell of freedom. You know, it's great. And there's never been any kind of accounting for that. Just like there's never been any accounting for the COVID shutdown that was disastrous that Tim Walz ordered. And it's kind of ironic because in 2026, all the indications are that Tim Walz is going to run for a third term as governor. Notwithstanding that he was humiliated on the national stage, notwithstanding his disastrous handling of both COVID and the George Floyd riots. And I guess we'll find out, you know, have people wised up at all.
And when Tim Walz, you know, is out on the circuit, well, University of Minnesota Law School graduation of all things, and he refers to ICE as Gestapo, it has no impact on Tim Walz or his standing in Minnesota politics or among the electorate.
It doesn't seem like it does. You know, it's like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. People walk around and they look normal. They look like regular people. But as you say, from the neck up, there's something missing. And I guess 2026 may be the year when we find out. I mean, are these chickens going to come home to roost, or are people just oblivious?
You wrote about the Democrat Party's future, in part riffing off a piece in the New York Times about what Democrats thought was their demographic destiny to have majorities for as long as time. Well, that just has been inverted by President Trump. But it's very interesting to see what's happening. And actually, Jonathan Chait has a piece on it in The Atlantic. So it's always interesting to see what the scuttlebutt is on their side and how they're processing these things. Talking about the coming civil war within the Democrat Party between the sort of neo-Marxist base of the party and some that want to try to win elections again. And I just, you know, sort of want to get your take on that. It's very, like I said, Minnesota, very similar to Illinois, although you're probably closer. At least you've got, you know, competition at the General Assembly or the state legislative level. We don't have that here. But, you know, how you see this confrontation coming, since you've got, you've got some sensible people there, but you also have elevated Tim Walz and Ilhan Omar, much like we have crazies running Illinois.
Yeah, well, if there's a civil war in the Democratic Party, I feel sorry for the side that supposedly represents sanity, because I don't think they've got a lot of members.
Yeah.
You know, people talk, you know, for example, Dennis Prager would always talk about the difference between leftism and liberalism. And I understand the distinction. But for years I've been asking, well, where are the liberals? You know, where are the Democrats who are willing to condemn the violence, to condemn the extremism, to try to chart some kind of a sane course? I'm not seeing those allegedly moderate Democrats either at the state level or the federal level. I mean, people like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi have done nothing to try to steer the Democratic Party in a better direction. So I don't know. I mean, I see a party here that is just driving toward the edge of the cliff and getting closer and closer. And as sane people jump out of the car, you know, the ones in control are farther to the left than ever.
That's a really good point, the way that you said that, too, that there's no ability to condemn those who would rationalize, contextualize violence, for example. There's no ability of even those that are trying to separate themselves or trying to reinvent themselves, like Gavin Newsom, just, you know, go do complete 180s, Kamala style. They cannot bring themselves to condemn anything that their party has done or has stood for, terrible legislation or just elevating terrible people, doing terrible things. There's just sort of for that sliver that wants to win elections. It's more like we're just going to walk away. You know, I don't want to talk about that anymore. I want to talk about this. Even from sort of the abundance agenda people, the liberal patriots like Rui Teixeira want to talk about making housing more affordable and walking back from some of the crazy environmental policies that they advance and banning of cars and so forth. But they can't separate themselves. They just have to sort of pivot. And it doesn't provide much moral clarity for the outside observer.
Well, it provides none. I'm sure you saw the video where Chuck Schumer is walking down the corridor in the Senate office building there, and a couple of people come up and start asking him questions and give him the opportunity to condemn the anti-Tesla violence, the firebombing of Tesla dealerships. And Schumer can't do it. He cannot bring himself to condemn that violence. And all he can do is to condemn Elon Musk. That was a revealing moment. I mean, I'm repeating myself, but I just don't see this allegedly moderate wing of the Democratic Party.
Well, and it's the same thing with the sort of general inability of anybody to mea culpa or condemn the fraud that was perpetrated that is now on full display as it pertains to the former President Biden's mental state and so forth. I mean, I don't want to talk about it anymore. We're going to move on. And so, I mean, everybody sees that.
And the poor man has prostate cancer, so let's quit talking about it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes, exactly. Right. I mean, okay. I mean, you go ahead and try and sell that. John Hinderaker, President and Center of the American Experiment, contributor at PowerlineBlog.com. John, thanks as always.
Great to be with you, Dan. Have a good day.
Thanks. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Attention! If you owe money to the IRS, this is an urgent message. The IRS is cracking down by sending out collection letters, garnishing paychecks, seizing bank accounts, and putting liens on homes and businesses. They call it enforced compliance, and you better watch out because penalties and interest on unpaid taxes compound daily, making it even harder to get out of debt. Don't let tax debt destroy your life. You need to call Optima Tax Relief, America's #1 tax resolution firm. They're experts in taxpayer assistance programs that can save you thousands if you qualify. A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau, Optima's resolved over $1 billion of tax debt for their clients. Let them fight on your behalf, helping to put your tax problems to rest. Call the tax professionals at Optima now for a free consultation.
Call 800-965-1433. 800-965-1433. 800-965-1433.
Optima Tax Relief.
Some restrictions apply. For complete details, please visit OptimaTaxRelief.com.
Welcome back to Ask Hasslis.
Your showrooms are